What was the harshest consequence your parents ever threw at you? Mine forced me into total silence for 2 full days, and it flipped my entire world upside down. When I was 16, my mouth ran faster than my brain, and not in an adorable class clown way. I had this uncontrollable habit of commenting on anything and everything I noticed. If someone's outfit looked odd, I pointed it out. If a teacher slipped up, I'd announce it loud enough for the whole class. My parents constantly begged me to pause and think before blurting things out, but I ignored them every time. The moment everything changed happened during Sunday dinner at my aunt's house. My cousin Liam had just gotten rejected from the college he'd been dreaming about for years. Everyone at the table was trying to comfort him, and then I opened my mouth. I told him maybe he wasn't cut out for anything prestigious anyway, and perhaps a community college bench was more realistic. The entire room went silent. Liam's face flushed, and he quietly excused himself. My parents didn't scold me. They didn't ground me. Instead, my mom took out a tiny notebook from her purse and slid it toward me. "For the next 48 hours, you aren't allowed to speak," she said. "Anything you want to say goes here." I actually laughed because it sounded ridiculous, but they weren't joking. The rules were simple but brutal. No talking to teachers. No talking at home. Not even talking to our dog, Milo. If I had something to say, I had to write it. I tried to argue, but my dad just tapped the notebook with his finger, so I scribbled, "This is insane," and pushed it toward them. My mom smiled and said, "The timer starts now." Monday hit like a truck. I couldn't answer teachers, so I ended up in detention. Group work was a disaster because I couldn't contribute. My classmates got annoyed fast. When my friend Noah asked what was wrong, I whispered the truth. Big mistake. Somehow, my mom found out and took my console for a week. By lunch break, I was miserable. A kid named Aiden spilled chocolate milk on my sneakers and then accused me of tripping him. Normally, I would have roasted him so hard he'd never forget it. But instead, I angrily filled pages while he and his friends laughed. I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't even react. Later in history class, Mr. Harris asked me a question about wubbow-bees. I just stared at him. He assumed I was being disrespectful, so I got another detention. My hands shook as I wrote an explanation into the notebook. At home, things only got worse. My little brother Evan kept asking annoying questions to trick me into breaking the rule. When I stayed silent, he started making up lies about me to my parents. Normally, I'd shut him down immediately, but I couldn't speak at all. I filled page after page with angry rants about how unfair everything felt. Tuesday was worse. The silence felt heavy, like it was crushing me. I watched conversations happen around me that I desperately wanted to join. At lunch, I overheard girls saying I seemed calmer lately. One even suggested maybe I was finally growing up. It stung. What surprised me most was seeing how people acted when I wasn't interrupting. My friend Mia was telling a story, and she actually looked relaxed. My mom talked to my grandmother without me jumping in to correct her. I noticed things I had completely overlooked before, like the way Liam looked defeated whenever college was mentioned, or how exhausted my dad looked during arguments, or how often I inserted myself into conversations that didn't need me. My notebook entries shifted from complaints to reflections. Wednesday evening, my parents sat with me at the kitchen table. The 48 hours were officially over. They handed back the notebook and said I could talk again. But for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to say. I flipped through pages of thoughts I once felt desperate to shout, but now realized didn't need to be spoken. My first words were, "I'm sorry." I called Liam and apologized. He seemed surprised, but he accepted. My parents didn't lecture me afterward. They just said I could keep the notebook if I wanted. I kept it because I realized how much I'd been missing by talking over everyone. The silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like a lesson I desperately needed. It became a reminder of the person I didn't want to be again. Even after the notebook was returned to me, the weight of the silence lingered. It wasn't just that I had been quiet for 2 days. It was that in that quiet, I had seen everything. I noticed the way Mom rubbed her temples when Dad left his socks on the floor. The way Evan sometimes glanced at me with a guilty, "I did something wrong" look after he had tried to bait me. I saw Liam differently, too. Before, I had judged him for sulking and acting frustrated over college. But now I understood the pressure he carried, the disappointment he felt, and how hard it was to manage expectations from everyone around him. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside my window. For a moment, I forgot I could talk. Then I remembered. My voice returned like a fragile glass window that had been repaired, delicate and cautious. I whispered a simple, "Good morning, Mom," and she smiled back, her eyes soft, not judging, not impatient. For the first time, our interaction felt like a mutual exchange rather than a performance I had to constantly sabotage with words. I decided to take my lessons from the notebook further. I wanted to see if this newfound awareness could really change how I lived. At school, I started listening more. In group projects, I didn't interrupt. Instead, I took notes. I realized that when I allowed others to speak, ideas became richer. When someone offered a suggestion, I considered it fully before responding. It was a revelation. Conversations became smoother, and I didn't feel the itch to dominate every discussion. One afternoon, during biology class, we were paired for a lab experiment. My partner, Sophie, was shy, and normally I would have jumped in, correcting her method before she even started. This time, I held back. I let her set up the experiment, watched her carefully, and then added a suggestion, softly, with a smile. She lit up. "Thanks," she whispered. The pride I normally got from showing off faded, replaced with a warm, quiet satisfaction. I realized that people didn't need me to correct them. They just needed to be heard. At home, the change was even more dramatic. Evan stopped testing me constantly. He still threw the occasional sly comment my way, but I no longer responded with the cutting remarks he expected. I started to notice subtle things. The way Mom looked exhausted after long days, the small sacrifices she made that never got acknowledged, and how Dad, despite his gruff exterior, worried constantly about all of us. The house felt calmer. Tension was still there, of course, but it wasn't amplified by my constant commentary. I also discovered another unexpected side effect of my silence: empathy. 2 weeks after the notebook ordeal, our family dog, Milo, became sick. Normally, I would have ignored the signs, too busy trying to impress people or correct someone's behavior. This time, I noticed the subtle, labored breathing, the way he hesitated to jump onto the couch. I stayed with him, stroked him gently, and helped Mom comfort him during the vet visit. Milo's tail wagged weakly when I sat close, and for the first time, I felt a kind of connection that had been blocked by my constant need to insert myself into everything. School didn't suddenly become paradise. Some classmates still pushed buttons, and I still had moments where I wanted to comment. But each time I paused, remembered the notebook, and asked myself, does this actually help? Or am I just feeding my ego? More often than not, I chose silence. The funny part was that my teachers started noticing the change too. Mr. Harris, who had scolded me during that Wubba 2 lesson, gave me an approving nod when I quietly presented a report last week. Even small acknowledgments like that meant more than any sarcastic comment I could have made. By the 3rd week, I realized something remarkable. People started opening up to me. Sophie confided her fears about her upcoming science project. Noah admitted he was stressed about his parents' expectations. Even Evan began sharing things he had been too embarrassed to talk about before. It was as if my restraint gave others the room to be themselves. For the first time, I understood that being quiet could be more powerful than talking. Of course, life wasn't perfect. There were moments when old habits threatened to resurface. One afternoon, I was paired with Liam on a group assignment. He still carried the sting from his college rejection and made a sarcastic joke about my tendency to overanalyze. Normally, I would have snapped back, pointing out every flaw in his joke. This time, I took a breath. I paused. I smiled faintly. And then I wrote a note in my notebook, a personal habit I had started keeping to stay grounded. "I won't ruin this with words. Let him speak. Let me listen." I handed him the note discreetly. He looked at me, puzzled at first, and then a small grin appeared. That tiny moment of connection was far more rewarding than any witty comeback could have been. My parents noticed, too. One evening, Mom pulled me aside while Evan was asleep. "I see the change," she said softly. "Not just that you're talking less. You're thinking more about others. It's like you finally get it." Her voice cracked slightly, and I realized this wasn't about control or punishment anymore. They had given me the silence not to punish me, but to teach me awareness, empathy, and patience. That weekend, I decided to revisit my notebook. Pages that had once been filled with angry, impulsive thoughts now looked like a roadmap to growth. I saw patterns, times I interrupted, moments I judged, situations where I failed to listen. I annotated these pages with reflections. I could have been kinder here. I could have listened longer there. Each entry became a tool for self-improvement rather than a venting space. The notebook, once a symbol of punishment, had transformed into my guidebook for becoming a better version of myself. Around this time, I also began noticing how my silence influenced my friendships outside school. Conversations with friends became more meaningful. When talking with Noah, instead of cutting him off mid-sentence, I let him speak fully before responding. He laughed harder when he was heard and trusted me more. When I hung out with Mia, she shared stories I'd never heard before, the kind of personal anecdotes that were usually buried beneath my commentary. Being quiet didn't make me invisible. It made me more approachable. Even family dinners became different. Instead of dominating discussions, I asked questions. I listened. I let Evan speak, let Mom reminisce about her day, let Dad share his thoughts without interruption. The room no longer felt like a stage where I had to perform my observations. Instead, it became a space for genuine exchange, where people felt seen. The realization was profound. Silence could be more impactful than speech. One Saturday, I went back to my aunt's house to visit Liam. I brought along my notebook, now filled with reflections and lessons learned. I handed it to him and said, "I wanted you to see this, not to brag, but to show I've been trying to be better." He flipped through the pages slowly, eyes widening as he read my thoughts. "Wow," he said softly, "you've really changed." That moment, simple as it was, felt like a victory far bigger than any sarcastic joke or witty remark I had ever made. By now, I understood the full effect of those 48 hours. They weren't just about stopping me from speaking, they were about teaching me the consequences of my words, the value of patience, and the depth of empathy. They taught me to truly see people, rather than hearing them only as a backdrop to my own thoughts. And that lesson, once learned, extended into every part of my life: school, home, friendships, and even my future ambitions. After that visit with Liam, I realized my silence had given me something far more valuable than control over conversations. It had given me clarity. I started noticing the little things I had always ignored, the subtle emotions in others' faces, the unspoken tensions, and the moments that begged for kindness. For the first time, I wasn't just hearing words, I was listening. And listening, I realized, was a skill I had never truly mastered before. School became a completely different place. Teachers noticed the change in me. Mr. Harris, who had once scolded me for my interruptions, began giving me small responsibilities in class, like helping younger students with projects. It felt strange at first. I was no longer the loud, opinionated student in the room. I was someone who guided others, quietly offering support rather than unsolicited commentary. The respect I gained wasn't through humor or bravado. It came from my restraint. Even the hallways, normally full of noise and chaos, started to feel calmer. Students approached me to ask questions or seek advice, and instead of jumping in with sarcastic or critical remarks, I listened. Sometimes I offered guidance, sometimes I simply nodded, allowing them to finish their thoughts. It was a revelation to see how much people appreciated being heard. My friends noticed the shift too. Noah, who had been patient with me before, now looked at me with a newfound appreciation. Mia smiled at me differently, a quiet acknowledgement of the change she had seen in me. Even Liam, who had initially thought I was insufferable, began spending more time with me. Slowly, relationships started healing, and new friendships formed. At home, the atmosphere was calmer, but challenges remained. Evan, ever the mischief maker, began testing my patience in subtle ways. He would leave his homework scattered around my room, or hide things to see if I would yell. My first instinct was always to react. But I remembered the notebook. Instead, I wrote notes, communicated through gestures, or simply ignored minor provocations. The results were surprising. Evan eventually stopped trying to get a reaction from me. He seemed puzzled at first, but slowly started respecting the quiet boundaries I had set. Even Mom and Dad noticed the difference. Arguments at the dinner table became rare. When disagreements arose, I spoke only when necessary, thoughtfully choosing my words instead of blurting out corrections or opinions. Then came the real test, a weekend family gathering at our grandparents' house. Normally, these gatherings were a nightmare for me. My unfiltered comments, though often funny, frequently embarrassed my parents or upset relatives. But this time I approached it differently. I made a conscious decision to observe first, comment second. I listened to the stories my grandmother shared about the past, laughed politely at jokes, and asked thoughtful questions without trying to hijack the conversation. My parents were visibly relieved, and my siblings began to interact with me differently, noticing that I was no longer the chaotic presence I used to be. The family gathering ended not with tension or embarrassment, but with smiles, laughter, and even compliments from relatives who hadn't expected me to change. At school, a bigger challenge awaited. The annual debate competition was approaching, an event that I normally dominated with my quick comebacks and sarcastic remarks. My teacher suggested I participate again, and I agreed, but I approached it differently. This time, I focused on preparation, strategy, and listening to my opponent's arguments rather than trying to dominate with wit. The experience was transformative. I realized that winning didn't have to mean being loud or cutting others down. It could mean being composed, strategic, and empathetic. I didn't win first place, but the respect I earned from peers and judges was more valuable than any trophy. One particularly challenging day came when I overheard a group of students mocking another classmate, someone who had struggled with a public presentation. My first instinct was to step in, point out their ignorance, and maybe deliver a harsh verbal reprimand. Instead, I remembered the lessons from the notebook and chose a different approach. I offered the classmate discreet encouragement after class, helped them review their materials, and quietly supported their next presentation. The gratitude in their eyes was far more rewarding than any sarcastic remark could have been. I realized that true influence didn't come from dominating conversations, but from empowering others silently. At home, a small but meaningful victory occurred when Mom invited me to help plan a community event at our local library. Normally, I would have taken control, insisting that my ideas were superior, correcting anyone who made a mistake. This time, I listened. I contributed thoughtfully, suggested ideas only when appropriate, and supported the efforts of others. Mom, who had always been patient with me, smiled more than I had ever seen, proud of the person I was becoming. Even Dad, who was often skeptical about my quiet phase, admitted that he noticed a real, lasting change in me. By the middle of the school year, the effects of the silence and the notebook had rippled through every part of my life. Academically, I performed better because I wasn't wasting energy on commentary or disruption. Socially, I built stronger, more genuine relationships. At home, the household felt more peaceful, with Evan, Mom, and Dad interacting in ways that didn't trigger my impulsive responses. I realized that the 2 days of silence had not just been a punishment, they had been a catalyst for lifelong growth. The discipline had forced me to slow down, to observe, to reflect, and most importantly, to understand the impact of my words. One day, while sitting in my room reviewing my notebook, I had an unexpected insight. The notebook, which had once been a tool of punishment, had become a mirror. It reflected not only my impulsive behavior, but also my growth. The pages were filled with initial anger, followed by reflections, and then by thoughtful observations of others. Each word served as a checkpoint, a reminder of how far I had come and how far I could still go. I realized that true maturity wasn't just about self-control. It was about awareness, empathy, and the deliberate choice to act in ways that uplifted others rather than asserting dominance through words. That evening, I shared one of my observations with Evan. He had been struggling with a friendship issue, and I listened quietly as he poured out his frustrations. I offered advice only when he asked, carefully choosing words that encouraged rather than criticized. The relief on his face was unmistakable. For the first time, he seemed to view me as a source of support rather than a constant commentator. That simple interaction reinforced everything I had learned. Silence could be powerful, empathy could be transformative, and growth often required restraint. The transformation didn't stop at home or school. In casual social situations, I began to notice subtleties in human behavior that I had completely missed before. Tone of voice, body language, and micro-expressions became as informative as words themselves. I could sense when someone was uncomfortable, excited, or anxious, and respond in ways that were supportive rather than reactive. The notebook had trained me not just to pause before speaking, but to observe and understand the world with a depth I had never experienced. By the time spring rolled around, I had started noticing patterns in my behavior that I hadn't realized before. Silence had become more than a temporary punishment. It had become a lens through which I could observe the world. I started keeping a mental inventory of interactions, noticing who spoke too much, who never spoke at all, and how words could wound or heal. This awareness extended beyond family and friends. I began noticing the teachers at school, too. How Mr. Harris carefully measured his tone when lecturing, how our science teacher whispered encouragement to struggling students, how the librarian's quiet patience soothed anxious kids. I realized that communication wasn't just about talking, it was about intention, timing, and empathy. One afternoon, I found myself in a situation that tested everything I had learned. During lunch, a group of students began teasing a new kid named Samuel. He was shy, soft-spoken, and nervous, trying desperately to find his place. Normally, my first instinct would have been to jump in, call out the bullies, maybe even humiliate them with sarcasm. But now, I paused. I took a deep breath, observed the situation, and decided to act differently. I quietly approached Samuel, offered to sit with him, and helped him navigate the cafeteria chaos. I didn't humiliate the bullies, but I also didn't condone their behavior. I simply shifted the focus, giving Samuel support instead of allowing myself to react impulsively. The relief in his eyes was more powerful than any sarcastic comment I could have made. That was when I realized silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy, it was empathy in action. At home, Evan was entering another phase of testing me. He discovered that I had been keeping a secret journal alongside the notebook, recording moments of personal growth, reflections on family dynamics, and strategies for handling difficult situations. Curious, he started reading over my shoulder one evening, expecting to find complaints or sarcastic remarks about him. Instead, he saw detailed observations about his own kindness, his small victories, and the moments he had unknowingly made life easier for me and others. He looked up, surprised, and asked, "You notice all this?" I nodded quietly, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. The dynamic between us began shifting subtly. He tested me less, listened more, and even asked for advice occasionally. I realized that my silence and reflection had not only changed me, but had also begun influencing those around me in profound ways. School challenges escalated as well. The statewide group project for history class required collaboration across several classes, and I was paired with students I didn't particularly like. In the past, I would have argued, taken control, or dismissed their ideas entirely. This time, I approached it differently. I listened first, asked clarifying questions, and offered suggestions only when necessary. We faced moments of disagreement, but instead of escalating into the typical drama, I facilitated calm discussions, encouraged compromise, and kept everyone on task. By the end of the project, not only did we submit one of the highest-scoring presentations, but I also earned recognition from teachers for leadership that wasn't loud or controlling, but thoughtful and inclusive. My parents noticed the ripple effects everywhere. My mom commented one evening, "You're learning to choose your battles, aren't you?" I shrugged, unsure how to put it into words. Dad, more practical and reserved, smiled quietly and said, "I see a difference, and it's not just about not talking, it's about noticing, understanding, and acting wisely." Even Evan, who initially had seen my silence as a challenge to exploit, began showing pride in my transformation. One of the most profound moments came unexpectedly. During a family outing to the local park, a little girl fell off the swing and started crying. Normally, my first instinct would have been to laugh, make a witty comment, or point out someone else's fault. But I remembered my lessons. I ran over, helped her up, checked if she was okay, and guided her gently to the bench while waiting for her parents. She hugged me before they arrived, and I felt a warmth that no sarcasm or joke could ever provide. That moment crystallized everything I had learned. Words without awareness were hollow. Actions guided by empathy were transformative. The summer brought new challenges. A neighborhood game tournament for kids and teens required teamwork, communication, and strategy. I usually dominated games with loud commands and commentary, but this time, I let others lead, suggested ideas only when necessary, and focused on encouragement rather than control. The results were remarkable. Our team worked better, performed stronger, and enjoyed the games more than ever. I realized that my silence had not muted me. It had amplified my influence in ways I had never imagined. Even casual interactions with strangers changed. Ordering coffee, walking in the grocery store, or waiting at the bus stop. I began observing the world with patience. I noticed a woman struggling to carry her groceries, an elderly man navigating uneven pavement, a child hesitating to cross the street. In each situation, I offered quiet assistance without needing recognition. The small gestures didn't require words, but the impact was significant. People smiled, thanked me, and sometimes lingered with unexpected conversations. Conversations where I truly listened without interrupting. The notebook, once a punishment, had now become a companion, a reflection of growth, and a reminder of the power of restraint. I carried it with me, adding entries about empathy, observations, mistakes, and victories. By now, the pages had multiplied, filling dozens of notebooks with thoughts I had once been too impatient to consider. I realized that the punishment had been a seed, planted in the fertile soil of impulsiveness, and now it had grown into a habit, a mindset, and a way of life. Then came the unexpected test, the family reunion at Aunt Clara's estate. Normally, these gatherings were stressful, filled with judgment, gossip, and endless unsolicited commentary from me. But this time, I approached it differently. I observed conversations, laughed politely, offered support to my cousins, and listened more than I spoke. Even Liam, who had once been the target of my unfiltered remarks, looked at me differently. He approached me quietly, said, "I've noticed you've changed," and offered a small smile. That acknowledgement, small as it seemed, felt monumental. I realized that growth wasn't about proving oneself through words or dominance. It was about influence through quiet strength. By the end of the summer, my life had shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. School, family, friends, and even casual encounters were all touched by the change my silence had initiated. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, but cumulative, building day by day, observation by observation, reflection by reflection. I had learned that patience, empathy, and listening could create ripples far beyond what I imagined. As the new school year approached, I noticed something extraordinary. Teachers who had once viewed me as an impulsive chatterbox now seemed to see me differently. My English teacher, Ms. Caldwell, approached me after class one morning and said, "I've noticed you've been more thoughtful in your contributions. It's impressive how much listening has improved your writing and insight." I was stunned. Recognition from a teacher I had always found intimidating made me realize the depth of the transformation. Words, when used wisely, carried far more weight than the constant flood of commentary I had relied on before. The lessons of silence extended beyond school. At home, family dynamics shifted subtly but profoundly. My parents treated me with more patience. Evan started to engage in discussions with more thoughtfulness rather than mischief, and even Milo, our dog, seemed to respond differently to my quieter energy. It wasn't magical. It was the natural result of observing, thinking, and acting with intention. The household felt calmer, more harmonious, and the small victories became motivating. One particular incident crystallized the true power of restraint and observation. One Saturday morning, I overheard my parents arguing in hushed tones. Normally, I would have jumped in, offering my opinions or corrections, the way I had for years. But this time, I stayed silent, observing their tone, choice of words, and body language. Later that evening, when they invited me into the conversation, I offered insights based on what I had observed, pointing out solutions and compromises they hadn't considered. Their jaws dropped. My father, usually stern and reserved, nodded slowly and said, "I can't believe how much you understand." My mother smiled, almost teary-eyed, and whispered, "You've grown into someone remarkable." For the first time, I realized that listening and watching could be as powerful as speaking, maybe even more so. My friendships evolved, too. My friend group, which had often grown frustrated with my interruptions and sarcasm, began treating me differently. Mia, in particular, noticed the change. One afternoon, as we worked on a class project together, she said, "I feel like I can actually have a conversation with you now without being interrupted a million times." I laughed softly, realizing the depth of what she was saying. The truth was, silence had taught me patience, empathy, and the subtle art of timing. Social gatherings became tests of my new skills. Birthday parties, school dances, and weekend hangouts, all situations I once dominated with words, now became laboratories for observation. I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. A friend's nervous habit of twisting their hair, a cousin's subtle discomfort at being overlooked, or the way someone's eyes lit up when they were truly listened to. I began offering support, advice, and humor at the right moments, creating ripples of positivity without ever dominating a conversation. The satisfaction was profound. However, silence also exposed harsh truths. One day, I overheard classmates speaking poorly about someone I cared about, spreading rumors and assumptions. My instinct was to intervene, to correct the narrative. But I remembered the lessons I had learned: observation, patience, strategy. I documented the conversation in my notebook, carefully noting names, phrases, and behaviors. Later, I discreetly informed the teacher, allowing action to be taken without my direct interference. The outcome was positive, and the person being targeted remained unaware that I had acted on their behalf. I realized that silence, coupled with thoughtful action, could wield influence in ways I had never imagined. The notebook had become my constant companion, expanding from pages of complaints into volumes of reflections, observations, and strategies. I had learned to write not only to express frustration, but also to analyze, plan, and grow. It documented a journey from impulsive speech to thoughtful action, capturing the evolution of a teenager forced into silence, who emerged stronger, wiser, and more empathetic. My parents eventually marveled at the depth and clarity of my entries. They encouraged me to keep writing, and I even began sharing some passages with teachers and friends, finding that my reflections often sparked meaningful conversations. One particularly transformative moment occurred during a family vacation. We went camping in the mountains, and my parents, Evan and I, spent hours hiking, exploring, and sitting by the campfire. Normally, I would have filled every silence with commentary, jokes, or corrections. But this time, I simply listened. To the crackling fire, the rustling trees, the laughter of my little brother, and the quiet words of my parents. That night, as we looked up at the stars, I felt a profound sense of peace. Silence had taught me to appreciate moments without feeling the need to control or comment. It had become a source of clarity and gratitude. School projects, family discussions, and casual interactions continued to provide opportunities for growth. I learned to handle disagreements without confrontation, to provide constructive criticism when appropriate, and to support others without overshadowing their voices. I noticed a profound change in how people responded to me. Teachers asked for my input with respect, classmates sought my advice, and family members valued my observations. Silence had not diminished my presence. It had amplified it. Yet the most impactful lesson came unexpectedly. One day, my cousin Liam, who had once been the target of my thoughtless remarks, approached me privately. "You've changed so much," he said almost shyly. "I can tell you've really learned to listen, and I appreciate it." The sincerity in his voice struck me deeply. For years, I had underestimated the power of listening and reflection. Now, hearing it acknowledged felt like a culmination of everything I had experienced. Through this period, I realized that silence was not punishment, but a teacher. It had forced me to slow down, observe, and understand the subtle dynamics of human interaction. I had learned empathy, patience, and the power of thoughtful action. What began as a harsh consequence had transformed into a lifelong skill, shaping my relationships, academic success, and personal growth. By the time I was ready to graduate high school, I had built a foundation of self-awareness and emotional intelligence that few of my peers could claim. I approached conflicts with strategy, conversations with empathy, and challenges with calm determination. My parents, who had once resorted to the extreme measure of enforced silence, now smiled knowingly whenever I entered a room. The lesson had stuck, and its impact would continue to shape my life far beyond my teenage years. After high school graduation, life took on a completely new rhythm. The lessons of enforced silence followed me like an invisible mentor. College was the first real test of whether I had truly internalized what I had learned. Dorm rooms, lecture halls, and bustling cafeterias were arenas of constant social and academic interaction. My old habits, jumping in, correcting every error, commenting on everything, could have easily returned, but something had changed. I listened first. I observed carefully. I weighed my words like they were precious commodities, choosing only the right moment to speak. In my freshman English class, I encountered a professor known for his fast-paced lectures and complex discussions. The temptation to interrupt or correct him was immense. Every instinct screamed to raise my hand, to point out the nuances I noticed, to correct a misinterpretation or debate a thesis. But I paused. I wrote notes instead. I reflected. And when I finally spoke during a seminar discussion, my contributions were precise, insightful, and meaningful. My classmates were captivated, and even the professor raised an eyebrow in genuine admiration. That moment cemented a lesson that had taken years to learn. Speaking less often, but with intent, made my voice far stronger than constant chatter ever could. Outside the classroom, the social dynamics of college life presented a different challenge. Roommates, clubs, and late-night study sessions were filled with conversations I once would have dominated. But now, I learned the subtle art of timing and observation. One evening, during a dormitory debate about environmental policy, I listened while others argued passionately. When I finally shared my perspective, it was not only informed but delivered with clarity and empathy, earning nods, agreements, and thoughtful responses. Silence had honed my awareness, giving me the ability to navigate complex human interactions without overstepping or overshadowing others. Part of this transformation was emotional. College brought stress, homesickness, and personal challenges that I had never faced before. In these moments, I realized how much of my growth had stemmed from enforced silence. The notebook, which had once been a tool for survival, became a way to process emotions and reflect on life. Each entry detailed insights about relationships, personal struggles, and observations about the world around me. Over time, the collection grew into a comprehensive map of my growth, documenting the evolution from impulsive teen to reflective young adult. Friendships deepened because I had learned to listen without judgment. I remember one night, a friend named Chloe confided in me about a family crisis she was going through. In the past, I might have offered immediate solutions, often trivializing her emotions with over-explaining or misguided advice. This time, I listened silently, nodding, making notes mentally, and responding with empathy. Chloe later told me, "You understand me in a way no one else does. You actually hear what I'm saying." That validation reinforced everything I had learned. Silence was not absence, it was attention, care, and respect. Even romantic relationships benefited from the lessons of restraint and observation. During my sophomore year, I met someone who was thoughtful, intelligent, and patient. Early in the relationship, I was tempted to fill every conversation with my thoughts, experiences, and critiques. But I remembered the power of listening. I asked questions, held space for her feelings, and carefully shared my insights only when appropriate. The result was a deeper, more genuine connection. I realized that by practicing thoughtful silence, I had learned the foundations of healthy, respectful communication. Academically, my performance soared. Professors noticed my attentiveness and engagement. I participated in discussions with authority, offered written reflections that were praised for depth, and completed projects with a strategic understanding of group dynamics. The notebook, once a punishment tool, had become a vault of ideas, observations, and self-analysis that enriched my studies. By senior year, I had developed not only excellent writing and communication skills, but also emotional intelligence that set me apart from my peers. Beyond college, entering the professional world tested every lesson I had learned. Internships, job interviews, and office environments were filled with people eager to assert their opinions, dominate meetings, or showcase knowledge. In these settings, I observed first, listened carefully, and spoke with precision. The lessons from those 2 days of silence in high school became a secret superpower. I could navigate complex social hierarchies, mediate conflicts, and influence decisions without needing to overpower conversations. Colleagues and supervisors often remarked on my calm confidence and perceptiveness, traits that had been honed by forced reflection years earlier. Personal relationships also benefited profoundly. My family, particularly Evan and Liam, noticed how much I had grown. Evan, once a mischievous and testing presence, would often seek my advice, knowing I would listen thoughtfully before responding. Liam and I developed a bond that was once strained, now built on mutual respect and understanding. Parents, friends, colleagues, and even casual acquaintances responded to the new version of me with appreciation and trust. The silence experiment had another unexpected impact: self-discipline. By controlling my impulsive need to comment, I cultivated patience, focus, and strategic thinking. I learned to wait for the right moment, to weigh consequences, and to approach situations with clarity rather than chaos. Decisions, both big and small, became informed and intentional. Life no longer felt like a constant battle of reactions. I had become the observer, the strategist, and the thoughtful participant. Yet the transformation was not without challenges. Sometimes old instincts returned. A heated argument with a sibling or a passionate debate among friends occasionally tempted me to interrupt or over-explain, but the memory of those 2 days of silence, the frustration, observation, and eventual clarity, acted as a grounding force. I would pause, take a breath, and choose words that mattered rather than words that filled space. The struggle between impulsive speech and thoughtful communication became a conscious exercise in self-mastery, one that continued to refine my personality and decision-making. Travel experiences highlighted these lessons further. Visiting new cities, interacting with diverse cultures, and navigating unfamiliar situations forced me to rely on observation and adaptability. I noticed body language, listened to tonal nuances, and engaged respectfully with local customs. The ability to stay silent while learning and observing became invaluable, allowing me to adapt quickly, build connections, and navigate situations with subtle influence and respect. As the years rolled on, the lessons from those 48 hours of silence remained a guiding force in my life. They had taught me a rare kind of self-awareness that most people spend decades trying to acquire. I found myself navigating complex relationships, both personal and professional, with a level of patience and understanding that surprised even me. Where I once would have rushed to speak, I now observed first. Where I would have argued or corrected, I now reflected before responding. And where I would have judged, I now sought to understand. In my mid-20s, I began mentoring younger colleagues at work. Watching them make mistakes I had once made, speaking without thinking, interrupting others, trying to dominate conversations, I couldn't help but smile. I shared pieces of my story, carefully, without preaching. I described the notebook my mom had given me and the 2 days of silence that felt so cruel at the time. At first, they laughed, thinking it was just an extreme parenting tactic. But as I explained how it changed my perspective, how it taught me empathy, strategic communication, and patience, they grew thoughtful. Many confessed they wished they had learned that lesson earlier. Romantic relationships, too, reached new depths. By my late 20s, I was in a relationship that was built on mutual understanding, respect, and thoughtful communication. My partner often marveled at how I could listen for hours without needing to speak, and when I did, my words carried weight. The art of listening had turned into an unspoken strength, an invisible thread that connected us more deeply than casual conversation ever could. It wasn't always easy. Occasionally, emotions ran high, and my instinct to speak impulsively threatened to break through. But I had learned the value of patience, of thinking before reacting, and of letting silence sometimes speak louder than words. Family relationships grew stronger as well. Evan, my little brother, often reflected on our childhood antics with a mixture of amusement and respect. He would ask, "Do you ever regret being that loudmouth kid?" I would smile and shake my head. "No," I told him, "but I'm grateful my parents forced me to pause. I learned more in silence than I ever did talking nonstop." Liam, too, came to rely on me in ways I had never anticipated. He confided in me about career decisions, personal dilemmas, and even small, everyday challenges. I listened, advised when necessary, but more importantly, I understood. Reflecting on the impact of those 48 hours, I realized it had been about far more than just controlling my speech. It had taught me self-discipline, emotional intelligence, and perspective. I had learned to measure my words, to understand when they were truly necessary, and when silence was far more powerful. I had discovered the difference between speaking to be heard and speaking to matter. These lessons spilled into every aspect of my life, academic, professional, and personal, shaping the person I became. Even in the smallest moments, the impact of those days lingered. At family gatherings, I found myself observing patterns of behavior I had previously ignored. I noticed the way my father's eyes reflected stress after long work days, how my mother's voice softened when comforting others, or how my siblings' words sometimes masked deeper emotions. Where once I had interrupted or interjected, I now absorbed these details, enriching my understanding of the people I loved. This quiet attentiveness allowed me to respond with empathy and care, creating a depth of connection I had never experienced before. Professional achievements were also influenced by this discipline. I rose through the ranks not by outshouting colleagues or dominating meetings, but by listening, analyzing, and strategically contributing. I became known for my ability to diffuse tensions, mediate conflicts, and offer insightful perspectives when they were most needed. Managers and peers alike sought my advice, recognizing that my calm, thoughtful approach often led to better outcomes than impulsive action. In a world that often rewards speed over reflection, my silence-turned strategy became a rare and invaluable skill. One particularly memorable instance occurred during a high-stakes project at work. The team was under immense pressure, deadlines were looming, and tempers flared. A heated argument broke out between two senior members, threatening the success of the project. In the past, I might have jumped in, attempting to solve the problem quickly, potentially escalating tensions. Instead, I remained silent, listening carefully, noting every detail, and waiting for the right moment. When I finally spoke, my words were measured, acknowledging concerns, validating emotions, and guiding the conversation toward a collaborative solution. The project was completed on time. Relationships were preserved, and colleagues later praised the intervention as both tactful and effective. Travel experiences reinforced the value of observation and patience. I visited countries with languages I didn't speak, cultures I barely understood, and norms that were entirely foreign to me. In these situations, silence became my greatest ally. By listening, observing gestures, and understanding context, I navigated complex social environments successfully. I learned that communication extends beyond words, that body language, tone, and presence often convey far more than speech ever could. Each trip deepened my appreciation for the lessons my parents had forced upon me all those years ago. The personal growth stemming from that initial punishment also influenced my creativity. Writing, once a casual habit, became a structured practice of reflection, analysis, and expression. The notebook I had filled during those 48 hours evolved into a journal that captured observations, ideas, and reflections on life. It became a tool for self-discovery and personal development, allowing me to explore complex emotions, ethical dilemmas, and human behavior. Many of my journal entries later formed the foundation for essays, articles, and even public talks about communication, empathy, and personal growth. Parenting, when the time came, offered another opportunity to apply these lessons. When I had children, I approached communication with them deliberately. I encouraged listening, reflection, and thoughtful responses, guiding them to understand the power of words. I shared age-appropriate anecdotes from my own childhood, illustrating the value of restraint and empathy. Watching them grow, confident in their ability to communicate effectively, brought me immense satisfaction. I realized that the lessons of my parents' harsh consequence had come full circle, shaping not only my life but the lives of the next generation. Even as life brought challenges, crises, and moments of self-doubt, the memory of enforced silence remained a source of strength. It reminded me that patience and reflection often yield far greater outcomes than impulsivity. That lesson, simple yet profound, became a cornerstone of my identity. I no longer feared moments of quiet or introspection. I welcomed them, recognizing that they offered clarity, perspective, and resilience. Looking back, I understood that the punishment had been a gift disguised as discipline. It was harsh, uncomfortable, and frustrating, but it forced me to see the world differently. It taught me empathy, observation, and self-restraint. It transformed impulsiveness into thoughtful action, chaos into clarity, and noise into meaningful communication. What I once viewed as cruelty had been a profound act of guidance, a lesson that shaped the trajectory of my life in ways I could never have imagined. By the time I reached my 30s, the impact was undeniable. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers remarked on my calm, measured presence, my ability to listen and respond thoughtfully, and my capacity to navigate complex situations with insight and composure. The 2 days of enforced silence, which once felt unbearable, had become the defining moment of my personal development. Every achievement, every relationship, every meaningful connection traced back to that single transformative experience. I kept the original notebook, now filled with reflections, observations, and life lessons. It was no longer a symbol of punishment, but a testament to growth, resilience, and understanding. Every page reminded me of who I had been, who I had become, and who I aspired to be. It served as a guide, a mentor, and a reminder that sometimes the harshest consequences deliver the most enduring lessons. Even now, when faced with challenges, conflicts, or moments of uncertainty, I return to that notebook, reflect on the lessons, and choose my words with care. The memory of those 48 hours of silence continues to shape every decision, interaction, and relationship. It is a constant reminder that the right words, spoken at the right time, carry far more weight than endless chatter. Ultimately, the harshest consequence my parents ever gave me, enforced silence, became the most valuable gift of my life. It transformed impulsiveness into thoughtfulness, chaos into clarity, and taught me the enduring power of listening. It shaped my character, strengthened my relationships, and guided my path through the complexities of life. What I once saw as punishment, I now see as the foundation of wisdom, empathy, and personal growth. And every time I reflect on that experience, I am grateful for the lesson, the notebook, and the 2 days that forever changed me.